By 1945, over 400,000 Axis POWs sat behind American barbed wire. Among them were Japanese soldiers, men raised to believe that surrender was worse than death. And yet behind the fences of America, their story would twist in a way no samurai code could explain. These warriors, once sworn to fight to the last breath, would soon hum along to an American invention more disarming than bullets, country music. Tonight, you'll discover how melody, not firepower, broke through walls of pride, reshaping captivity in the most unexpected way. If you were captured by the enemy, stripped of rank and weapon, would you sit in silence, clinging to honor? Or would you let yourself surrender, not to force, but to a song? From the first days of training, every Japanese recruit was drilled with a single truth: surrender was worse than death. They were taught that a shattered jewel was more honorable than a tile left intact. Grenades were not just weapons, they were exit doors. On Saipan and Okinawa, soldiers leapt from cliffs or clutched explosives to their chests, choosing instant fire over the shame of capture. So when a man was seized alive, he did not feel rescued, he felt erased. Dragged from bunkers, bleeding and delirious, many whispered apologies to the emperor under their breath. They were not prisoners of war in their own minds. They were failed warriors, disgraced shadows, stripped of the very identity that had given them purpose. Each step into captivity felt heavier than wounds. Their families would never know the truth. Propaganda at home insisted Japanese soldiers never surrendered. And so, in the stillness of their first nights behind barbed wire, many believed they were already dead, ghosts pacing in foreign soil, waiting for a punishment even harsher than the battlefield. But what came was not fire or execution, it was something far stranger and infinitely more disarming. They expected chains, humiliation, perhaps even parading before jeering crowds. Rumors had painted America as a land of cruelty, an enemy who would carve their defeat into their flesh. Instead, trucks rumbled across highways so wide they seemed endless. Through cracked windows, the prisoners glimpsed farmlands unscarred by bombs, neon-lit diners buzzing with laughter, and children tossing baseballs in front yards. It was as if the war did not exist here. For men whose last memories were jungles rotting with corpses and villages flattened by artillery, America's calm was unbearable. The enemy's homeland looked untouched, vibrant, overflowing with life, a mocking contrast to their own firebombed cities. At last, the convoy halted. Rows of barbed wire stretched toward the horizon, crowned by wooden guard towers. Floodlights hummed, barracks loomed like shadows. The clang of gates closing echoed like a final sentence. Here, their world shrank to fences and watchful rifles. Yet within those fences, the unthinkable waited. Not beatings, not starvation, but encounters that would gnaw at their very sense of self. They had survived the battlefield, but in America, they were about to face a stranger enemy, mercy. They braced for the worst. In whispered tones, men predicted starvation, tainted rations, or meals designed to humiliate them. Hunger, after all, had been a constant companion on the battlefield. They had chewed grass, gnawed bark, even boiled leather to survive. Then came the first tray. Thick bread, slices of meat, steaming soup fragrant with spices they couldn't name. Some stared in disbelief, too proud to reach out. Others, trembling with exhaustion, devoured everything in seconds. Tears welled in the eyes of hardened men who had faced machine guns without flinching. Not tears of joy, but of shame. How could the enemy feed them more generously than their own army had? Each bite felt like betrayal, a slow erosion of honor. Some muttered that this was a trap, a softening before cruelty. Yet the meals came again and again. The bitter truth set in. They ate better behind American fences than they ever had under the rising sun. Bushido had prepared them for a glorious death, not for the humiliation of surviving on an enemy's bread. Survival had become its own battlefield, and they were already losing. When night fell, the camp grew quiet. Barbed wire glittered under floodlights, guards paced their towers, and prisoners tried to sleep in uneasy silence. Then, faintly, another sound drifted across the darkness, a strum of strings, a voice, low, unguarded, rising into melody. It was not the rigid march of military bands, nor the thunder of taiko drums they knew from home. This was something softer, melancholy, almost fragile, country music. The song spoke of long highways, of mothers waiting by the porch, of lost love and heartbreak under endless skies. Words they could not fully understand, but feelings they recognized instantly. At first they resisted, turning away, plugging ears with rough cloth. To enjoy the enemy's music was to surrender more than body. It was to surrender spirit. But music ignores walls. It slid between the wires, seeped into barracks, and nestled into restless hearts. A soldier later admitted in his diary, "I despise them." Yet when I heard their song, it felt like home, though not my own. Soon some began to hum along, quietly at first, then louder, voices mingling with the very sound of their captors. For men who once roared banzai into battle, this was the unlikeliest chorus. It began almost as a joke. One prisoner, emboldened by fatigue and curiosity, mimicked the guitar strums with his voice, humming nonsense syllables to match the rhythm. Others laughed, sharp, nervous, the laughter of men caught between shame and temptation. But laughter broke the silence, and silence had been heavier than chains. Soon a handful dared to hum as well. They did not know the words, but the melodies carried emotion strong enough to bridge the gap. A chorus of low voices rose, awkward, uneven, but undeniably alive. In those moments, something dangerous happened. Captivity no longer felt like pure defeat. Music gave them back a fragment of humanity the war had stripped away. Yet this was also the deepest betrayal of their code. To borrow the enemy's song was to admit a crack in the wall of resistance. Some resisted bitterly, turning away, muttering curses in the dark. But night after night the hum returned, soft at first, then swelling until it filled the barracks. The voices of broken warriors weaving themselves into melodies of a foreign land, blurring the line between captive and captor. The American guards had expected hostility. They were prepared for stares of hatred, for a spit on the ground, for a silence heavier than the fences themselves. So when, one night, they heard voices drifting from the barracks, foreign accents tangled in the chords of "You Are My Sunshine," they froze. Some laughed in disbelief. Others lowered their rifles, listening. Imagine it. The very men who had charged screaming through jungles now humming the anthem of American small towns. It was absurd, almost comical, and yet strangely moving. For the guards, it was proof of something deeper than military victory. No propaganda film could capture this sight. Prisoners, once sworn to die rather than yield, now singing songs of the enemy under their breath. Some guards began to encourage it, strumming louder, teaching tunes by repeating lines slowly, grinning as prisoners echoed the words back clumsily. The music became a bridge, awkward, fragile, but real. Behind barbed wire, war had forged an unexpected choir. For a fleeting moment, captor and captive shared not weapons or hatred, but rhythm. It was the kind of irony war historians later shake their heads at. Truth stranger than any battlefield tale. What began as humming soon grew into something bolder. The Americans, half amused, half curious, started shouting lyrics slowly, repeating each line until the prisoners stumbled through the strange syllables. "You are my sunshine." The words sounded foreign, awkward in Japanese mouths. Yet repetition turned clumsiness into rhythm. Soldiers who had once memorized battle chants and imperial slogans now pieced together verses about love, sorrow, and open skies. At first, some prisoners mocked their peers. "Dogs of the West," they sneered, singing for scraps. But night after night, the voices multiplied. Even the skeptics felt the pull. Singing was not surrender, it was escape. For a few minutes, the weight of defeat lifted. They were not disgraced warriors, not abandoned ghosts. They were men with voices, laughing at missed notes, competing over who could sing louder. One prisoner later admitted, "I feared the emperor's judgment. But when I sang, I forgot fear for a moment. It was freedom." In the rhythm of enemy songs, shame began to lose its grip. Soon the nightly hum became a ritual. Barracks once filled with silence and despair now vibrated with song. A strange warmth spread through the camp, carried on borrowed melodies. Guards strummed guitars, prisoners clapped hands, voices rose together. The music did more than pass time, it rewrote the atmosphere. Where suspicion had lingered, curiosity bloomed. Where bitterness festered, humor returned. Men who had once avoided each other now sat shoulder to shoulder, mouthing foreign lyrics as though sharing a secret. The irony was inescapable. Warriors trained to die with honor were now bound by songs of heartbreak and sunshine. The same men who would never bow to an American officer willingly sang his folk tunes beneath the stars. For the Americans, it was a spectacle. For the Japanese, it was survival of a different kind, not of body, but of spirit. Singing dulled the sting of disgrace, filled the void of exile, and reminded them, however faintly, that life still pulsed within them. Barbed wire no longer only meant captivity. In the echoes of music, it also meant unlikely communion. One prisoner's diary, later recovered from the war, captured the quiet rebellion of melody. His words trembled across the page. "Tonight I closed my eyes and forgot the wire. For the first time since capture, I did not dream of death." The song was foolish, about sunshine and love, yet it carried me away. I was not a soldier, I was only a man, breathing. The shame of captivity gnawed at him daily. He feared the disgrace waiting back home, the whispers of dishonor. Yet in those stolen moments of music, he found a strange sanctuary, one that neither rifles nor bayonets could breach. What war could not give, song did, release. It was not loyalty to America, nor betrayal of Japan. It was a return to humanity. His fragile script reminds us of a truth soldiers on both sides discovered. Sometimes the smallest comforts, a chorus hummed in the dark, became more powerful than steel. American camp officials were no fools. They saw what music did to restless men. Radios were kept humming. Guitars were quietly encouraged. Concerts sprouted inside the wire, with guards performing for captives and sometimes prisoners forming groups of their own. The results were undeniable. Calmer barracks, fewer escape attempts, less violence. Content prisoners were easier to manage, and so music became an unofficial weapon, gentle, subtle, but effective. No propaganda leaflet could match its power. No barked order could ease the bitterness of defeat the way a single chorus could. While the Geneva Conventions bound the Americans to treat prisoners humanely, country music went further. It softened hearts. One historian later remarked, "A rifle enforced obedience. A guitar invited it." The lesson was chilling. In war, control does not always come from force. Sometimes it comes from a song. Would you trade the thunder of war drums for the cry of a fiddle? For Japanese soldiers, music had always been a weapon. Military marches drove them into battle, sharp and relentless, hammering loyalty into bone. Every beat was duty. Every lyric was command. To falter meant dishonor. Then came country music, sliding strings, loose rhythms, lyrics about loss and longing. To ears trained for discipline, it sounded absurd, even weak. Where was the order, the command, the purpose? And yet, beneath its softness lay something they had never been permitted: vulnerability. A soldier could admit he was lonely. A man could confess he was broken. In the twang of American strings, they found not weakness but freedom. Freedom to be flawed, to feel, to mourn. It was a revelation sharper than steel. music here did not demand obedience, it invited honesty. And for men once shackled by honor codes, that freedom was more dangerous and more irresistible than any rifle. Here lay the cruelest paradox. The same warriors who had sworn to die before surrender now clapped along to "You Are My Sunshine." Men who once spat at American decadence now tapped their feet to its simplest tunes. Fact one, they had been taught America was soulless, decadent, unworthy of respect. Fact two, in captivity, it was America's homespun songs that soothed their despair. The contradiction was impossible to deny. The Emperor's soldiers, raised to despise weakness, found solace in music about heartbreak, longing, and love. One American guard later wrote, "We didn't need to force them. The songs did the work for us." That was the deepest irony of all. Not bullets, not barbed wire, not threats, just melody. Songs had crossed a chasm ideology could not, leaving Japanese prisoners disarmed in spirit long before they walked free. The war had broken their bodies, music had broken their walls. Picture a summer evening in a dusty Texas camp. The sun sinks, guards lean against wooden posts, and someone pulls out a weathered guitar. The first chords spill into the air. At first, the Japanese prisoners linger at a distance, wary, but the notes are warm, familiar now. Slowly, they drift closer. A guard sings, hesitant voices join. Laughter follows when a prisoner butchers an English word. The barbed wire still stands, but for those moments it feels less like a cage. Young American soldiers, barely older than the captives, see not enemies but peers. Some trade cigarettes for translations of lyrics. Others clap along, amazed at the unlikely harmony. A strange friendship flickers in the twilight. The rifles, the orders, the uniforms, these dissolve in song. What remains is raw humanity, but harmony came with a cost. Not every prisoner sang. Some turned their backs, sitting apart in silence, refusing to hum even a note. To them, joining the music was betrayal, proof of weakness that would stain their name forever. Whispers spread in the barracks. Those who sing have already lost their honor. For men raised to believe surrender itself was unforgivable, the thought of embracing the enemy's songs was unbearable. Pride demanded silence, even as loneliness gnawed at their bones. This divide cut deeper than barbed wire. On one side, men grasped at the fragile joy of melody. On the other, men clung desperately to a code that had already condemned them. Neither side was wrong. Both carried the unbearable weight of defeat. And so, within the camps, another war brewed, not fought with rifles, but with silence and song. If you were one of those prisoners trapped behind barbed wire and torn between pride and survival, what would you have done? Would you sing along to your captor's music, or guard your silence, clinging to honor even in defeat? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're here, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more untold wartime stories, and ring the bell so you never miss the hidden chapters history tried to erase. What unfolded inside those camps was not just idle entertainment, it was an experiment, an unplanned form of psychological warfare. U.S. officials knew morale was everything. A restless camp was a dangerous camp, but a camp filled with music, that was order without force. This was cultural innovation in wartime, a subtle test of how songs, literature, even films could shape the minds of enemies. Unlike propaganda that screamed commands, country music whispered comfort. It bypassed pride, slipping straight into the heart. Historians later noted that these camps became laboratories of soft power. What began as guards strumming guitars turned into a blueprint for influence. Decades later, the same cultural tools, radio, movies, even pop songs, would be wielded across the globe as instruments of American reach. Even in captivity, prisoners were allowed a lifeline, censored letters home. Each message was short, stripped of detail, carefully read by American censors. Most were little more than reassurances. I am alive. I have food. Do not worry. Yet between the lines, fragments of truth slipped through. Some spoke of hearing soft foreign songs at night, likening them to lullabies. Others hinted at strange rhythms that eased their dreams. They never dared admit how deeply the music moved them, but the words revealed a quiet transformation. For families in Japan, these letters must have been bewildering. Soldiers raised on martial discipline now spoke of gentleness, of melodies carried on foreign instruments. The irony was sharp. Men who had once marched to drums of war were now comforted by songs of the enemy. Many imagine all prisoner of war camps as brutal hells, places of starvation, abuse, and endless suffering. And in Asia, that picture was tragically real. Allied captives under Japan endured horrors few survived. But in America, the paradox cut deep. Japanese prisoners ate better than civilians in their homeland. They received medical care their comrades on the battlefield could only dream of. Some even gained weight behind barbed wire while their families at home starved. And then came the strangest detail of all. They sang, they laughed, they clapped along to the enemy's music. This does not erase the cruelty of war. It does not diminish the crimes committed elsewhere. But it shatters the myth that captivity always meant despair. In the United States, captivity was laced with contradictions, both humiliating and humane. When Japan finally surrendered in 1945, the gates of the camps opened. Prisoners walked free, not as conquering heroes, but as defeated men returning to a shattered homeland. They carried almost nothing with them. No possessions, no weapons, only memories. Yet among those memories were songs. Some whispered fragments of country ballads. Others recalled harmonicas echoing across night barracks. They did not dare admit it publicly, for the shame of captivity weighed heavy. But inside, the melodies lingered like invisible scars, half comfort, half humiliation. Historians have noted that years later, a few former POWs confessed, "We hated the war, we hated defeat, but the music we could not forget." Decades later, Japan rose from ruins into prosperity. American culture swept in, jazz, films, Coca-Cola, and yes, country music. For many, it felt new, but for those ex-prisoners, it was déjà vu. They had already heard the first notes, not in Tokyo nightclubs, but behind barbed wire in Arkansas. Some privately admitted to their children that camp life had been strangely human at times, a paradox they could barely explain. The enemy who jailed us also gave us songs. Their children struggled to reconcile this, but the truth seeped forward. Captivity had reshaped identity in ways silence could not erase. This was the legacy of war's strangest weapon, not just bombs or bullets, but banjos and ballads that bridged two worlds. Years after the war, an American researcher interviewed former guards and prisoners. What he discovered was almost unbelievable. In one camp, the Japanese POWs had secretly translated a country song into their own language. They sang it softly, under their breath, blending foreign rhythm with the Japanese words. For the guards, it was a curiosity. For the prisoners, it was survival. Music became a secret bridge, not surrender, but adaptation. A way of saying, we are still human, even here. The twist? Some of those same men, once enemies locked in cages, later met American veterans at reunions decades later. And what broke the silence between them was not politics, not apologies, but a song. Voices that once stood on opposite sides of war now harmonized on the same melody. So what do we learn from this forgotten chapter? That even in the darkest hours of war, when men were stripped of freedom, something as fragile as a song could outlast steel, starvation, and shame. Guns fell silent, empires collapsed, but melodies remained. It's a chilling irony. Soldiers trained to kill carried home not just memories of defeat, but tunes of the enemy. Music became the quiet prisoner that no barbed wire could contain, and this is only one of history's paradoxes. Because in another corner of the war, enemy soldiers didn't just share songs, they shared cigarettes, laughter, even meals across no man's land. A truce that no general ever ordered.